Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave White. I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation. I'd like to welcome you all to our first case-critical discussion of the semester. This series mobilizes thinkers and doers to discuss high-stakes threats and sustainability concerns in our region, state, and country. Today's Case Critical is co-hosted by ASU's Healthy Urban Environment Initiative. We have 4 speakers coming from academia, from the city of Phoenix, from a national NGO, and a regional nonprofit, all focused on climate justice. Let's get started. I'd like to introduce today's moderator and presenter, Ariane Middel. Ariane is a senior sustainability scientist at GOC and a leader in the field of urban climate science. Her research interests lie in the interdisciplinary field of urban climate, with a focus on climate-sensitive urban form, design, landscapes, and infrastructure in the face of extreme heat and climate uncertainty. She directs the SHADE Lab at ASU, home to the friendly heat robot Marty, and recently received a National Science Foundation Career Award to develop a thermal exposure model that is based on Google Street View data. And I've had the pleasure to work with Ariane for many years and happy to have her host this important Case Critical series. Ariane, take it away.
Thank you, Dave. I will start a presentation on current healthy urban environment or HUE projects that are related to thermal exposure, and then I will introduce our 3 guests. And then after our short presentations, which last about 7 to 10 minutes, we will take questions from the audience. Okay, so I will be today speaking about some of the healthy urban environments projects that I'm involved in. HUE, or Healthy Urban Environments, is an initiative at ASU that's focused on solutions-oriented heat mitigation and also air quality research. I probably do not have to motivate this webinar. Phoenix has been breaking any type of heat record you could think of this year. So we've had 50 days of 110 degrees Fahrenheit or more that broke the earlier record of 33 days. And we are probably expecting 2 more days with the upcoming heat wave tomorrow and Saturday. We've had the hottest month, the hottest August, the hottest July, the second hottest month, the hottest summer, most 90-degree nights, the list goes on and on. And specifically this year, this heat is really a multiplier to the COVID threat that we experience as well. So it's not, 2020 is not a very good year. So it's even more important in 2020 to look at heat mitigation strategies. And this is where the Healthy Urban Environment Initiative comes in. So the goal of this initiative is to work with practitioners and community members in the Maricopa County region to develop and test heat mitigation strategies and also air quality improvement strategies. This initiative is led by Matt Fraser and Chuck Redman here at ASU. And there are various heat and air quality related projects, but I'll specifically focus on the heat related project for this webinar. So one key aspect here is how people are exposed to the heat. Not specifically looking at how people behave or move through the urban environment, but in this case, how people are actually exposed to certain features in the urban environment and how you can use urban design to make it cooler in urban environment for people who are outdoors or have to be outdoors. And specifically, some of the mitigation measures that you can use are providing more shade, changing the urban form and the arrangement of your buildings, changing materials. And I'll talk about some of the projects that we're currently involved in with the Urban Environment Initiative to tackle some of those problems. And one key aspect of all of the projects that I'll quickly be touching on is Marty. So Marty is the, as Dave nicely put him, the friendly heat robot who can measure the radiant heat a person is exposed to as the person is walking through the urban environment outdoors. Marty has its name from mean radiant temperature, or MRT, because that's what Marty measures. And MRT is a radiative temperature that that summarizes the heat load a human body experiences outdoors. And if you look at the mean radiant temperature, it can be up to 30 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit higher when you're in the sun than when you're in the shade or to corresponding air temperature, just because the heat load on the human body is so much higher in the sun. So Marty is a garden cart from Amazon, and it has a bunch of meteorological sensors attached to him. Marty is COVID tested, COVID approved. He's wearing a mask, and his radiometers are on cross arms, so he can safely keep his social distance. The first project I would like to talk about is the Right Shade in the Right Place project, and it's a collaboration with the city of Tempe. Oftentimes municipalities face challenges when it comes to shade provision, because oftentimes in places where you would like to plant trees, there is some sort of conflict, mostly power lines, underground infrastructure, utility lines. So there are a lot of places where you would like to plant trees and provide more shade, but it's just not possible because of utility conflicts. So the question we're looking into for this project is, are there any viable shade alternatives that you can place in these locations where you have these conflicts? And as part of this project, we use Marty to assess various shade types, from the different tree species to engineered and lightweight structures, umbrellas, shade sails, pergolas, courtyards, and then also shade from urban forms. So that could be shade from a street canyon, shade from an overhang or awning. And we take Marty out to these shaded locations and we measure the mean radiant temperature in those locations. And then we can come up with, hopefully with guidelines and a ranking and best practices of which shade type is the best shade type for which location where you can plant trees. We have some preliminary results for this study. And it looks like if you consider mean radiant temperature, the radiant heat load on a person's body, the shade that comes from urban form, which would be a shade from buildings, from awnings, from overhangs, is actually the most effective shade if you look at the performance over the whole day. The trees are runner-up, so they're medium effective in terms of shade, and then the engineered shade, which would be the shade sails, shade from PV structures, shade from pergolas, would be the least effective shade, but any shade is great. So we don't want to discourage people from providing shade. It's just looking at alternatives if you can plant trees and which of those types are the most effective. The second project I would like to touch on is the Heat and Health Maps for Decision-Making project. And this is led by my colleague, Paul Coseo, and there are various ASU faculty involved in this project, Dave Fondula, Jenny Vanos, Katja Brundiers, I hope I didn't miss anyone. This is in collaboration with the City of Tempe and Braden Kay. And we took Marty out on a stroll through Tempe neighborhood parks. This picture here is from Kiwanis Park. It's a huge residential park in the heart of Tempe. And we measured thermal exposure in the park on multi-use paths, on parking lots, and then also on playgrounds to see how those locations perform in terms of the amount of shade that's available, in terms of the heat stress people experience. And this picture that you see was taken during a so-called heat walk that we organized. It was a community engagement event where we asked residents to join us on a 1-hour walk through the park, and then the residents responded to certain sections of the park, how comfortable they felt, how much shade they thought there was, if it was a nicely designed park or worse parks. So we're still crunching those numbers to see how the community response actually matches up with the readings that Marty provided us. The third project I would like to touch on is the Phoenix Zoo parking lot project. This is in collaboration with the Phoenix Zoo and the City of Phoenix. It's led by Ray Quay. And this project is about an expansion project that the Phoenix Zoo has. The Phoenix Zoo would like to expand their parking lot beyond the existing size of the parking lot. So this is the picture you see here is the current extent of the parking lot. So they want to extend the parking lot to match the demand for Phoenix Zoo Lights, which is the big event they have every fall. And we took Marty out on those parking lots in this past summer to see what are the conditions currently on the parking lot and what extreme heat would you be exposed to if you were to walk from your car to the zoo. The hope is that as the parking lot gets expanded, there will be some shade structures being put in to the southwestern end of the route that you see here on the screen. And so we'll come back next summer to see if those shade structures, after they've been built, actually make a difference in people's exposure and people's comfort as they're visiting the zoo. And so the last project, because I'm almost running out of time here, is the Cool Pavement project with the city of Phoenix. And we may hear some more information from Mark Hartman, who's coming up later in this webinar. So this project is in collaboration with Phoenix, and we are in the process of assessing the performance of Cool Seal, which is a type of slurry that you apply on top of existing asphalt to increase the reflectivity of that asphalt. So as the road gets lighter in color and there's more reflection, the hope is that more energy that hits the asphalt from the sun, from the direct sunlight, is actually being reflected back into the atmosphere as opposed to being stored in the pavement or in the asphalt, which then in turn would reduce the urban heat island in the region. And we have a variety of things that we're going to measure. Actually, we have a fieldwork campaign planned for this upcoming Saturday. So we're actually getting ready to do some fieldwork. So we will do MARDI measurements, because MARDI can measure the reflectivity and the radiation that a person experiences on the asphalt, but also on the sidewalk next to the asphalt. Then we do car traverses, where we attach thermocouples to cars, and the cars drive through the neighborhood to collect fine scale temperature data. Then we're doing some helicopter overflights with a student strapped to a helicopter taking thermal images of the neighborhoods that we'll be monitoring to have some surface temperature readings. And then we'll also do some spectrometer readings, and those readings are important if you would like to assess the durability and the performance of those coatings over time, because if you have dust storms or litter from trees, those all affect the reflectivity of the coating, and the coating might become less effective over time. So we're measuring the reflectivity with a spectrometer once a month to see how the pavement holds up over time. And then we'll do surveys as well. So we will ask residents in those neighborhoods that are being coated, what do you think about the pavement? Do you think it's cooler? What's the perception? Because the perception might be different from what we can actually measure with our instrumentation. Yeah, in terms of COVID, so I talked a lot about heat. COVID and fieldwork actually go very well together sometimes, not always. So COVID on the one hand helps with field research, at least the research that I do, which doesn't require groups of people, but it's usually just one or two people with MARDI, and you can wear masks and you can stay socially distant. And on one hand, if you're interested, for example, in people's behavior and how people are exposed to the heat as they're moving across the urban environment, people behave differently in times of COVID. People don't go to the park or to the playground. People just stay home. So the space use changes. And we actually had a project planned to monitor thermal conditions and space use on playgrounds. And we had to delay that because nobody's using those playgrounds right now. So in that sense, COVID has an impact on field research and will continue to have it until we have a vaccine probably. But heat mitigation, coming back to heat, is really more important than before, because COVID will displace people. Some people will lose their home because they don't have a job and they become homeless, and then they'll be outdoors and subject to the heat. And I'm pretty sure we'll hear more about this in the upcoming panel discussions. One question that I have moving forward for all the subsequent panel speakers is, what's your guess on the number of 110-degree days that we will have in 2020? So we're currently at 50. So just to get an idea from what you think, that's my last question. And with that, I'm not taking any questions. So we will actually move into the next speaker now, and we'll take questions at the end of all the presentations. That's a little bit easier to manage. Okay. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, and that's Juan Declet-Barreto. Juan is the Climate Vulnerability Social Scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where he maps, analyzes, and finds solutions to the unequal human health and livelihood impacts of environmental hazards, and especially those exacerbated by climate change. He's also a Sun Devil. So in 2013, he became the first graduate of CHISPA, which is the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. He was in the Environmental Social Science PhD program, has a master's and bachelor's in geography, and an associate degree in GIS, all from ASU, so he's a true Sun Devil. And he's also the contributing author of the UCS report Killer Heat in the US that analyzes future heat index conditions under a changing climate and the IPCC and Paris Agreement's climate scenarios. Recently, he has researched the colliding impacts of climate change impacts and COVID-19 among vulnerable populations, and I'm pretty sure we'll hear more about this in a second. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hi to the ASU community and all the people who joined us today. I want to thank Dr. Middel and Lauren as well for inviting me to share some of my recent collaborative research on the colliding impacts of killer heat and COVID on vulnerable populations. I also want to say hi to my colleague and friend, Masavi Parea, who's on the panel as well, the tireless environmental justice advocate doing a lot of great work in increasing resilience to climate justice and climate justice for vulnerable populations in Phoenix. I hope that what I will share here will prompt ample and deep discussions about how climate vulnerability scientists and climate justice advocates can work together to reduce extreme heat and COVID impacts on vulnerable populations. Globally, climate change impacts are colliding with COVID-19 and complicating the response of governments at all levels and across the globe. My colleagues and I at the Union of Concerned Scientists recently had the opportunity to explore this in a commentary published in Nature Climate Change. As I will show, climate change impacts and the health and economic toll of the pandemic are colliding in brutal ways that are negatively affecting the lives and well-being of millions globally and in the US, especially low-income people of color. Long-standing historical inequities in access to equal protection under and from the law, education, jobs, housing, and clean environments among Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color have already exacerbated climate change impacts in the US and globally. These inequities widen the climate resilience and vulnerability gap over the decades since the realities of climate change and environmental degradation became evident to scientists, the general public, and decision makers. But COVID-19 has accelerated that gap in a matter of months since the pandemic took hold in the US, in large part due to the failure at all levels of government, from the federal to the local in cities, counties, and states that did not heed public health and pandemic experts' advice. The results of ignoring or sidelining science, along with a precarious or almost non-existent social safety net for millions in the US are clear. Communities from Phoenix to Houston to Miami and everywhere in between, where there are large vulnerable populations, are devastated by the health and economic toll of COVID. What do these inequities look like in the US? I'll turn your attention to the graphs here. At the county level, a spatial clustering analysis of COVID rates and key populations with lessened resources to deal with both climate impacts and COVID show the spatial confluence of high COVID rates in people of color, those living in poverty and without health insurance. Though the COVID rates are from late April and are dated by now, the social demographic marker data are not, and we can easily identify counties with large Indigenous, African American, and Hispanic populations in the Four Corners area, near northeastern Arizona, the US South, and South Florida that have also seen relatively large rates of COVID infection in those counties. This analysis was published in both English and Spanish in a blog post of mine and used to urge federal, state, and county authorities to enhance collaboration and deploy resources to counties with large vulnerable populations and COVID rates. So turning to extreme heat, in an analysis conducted and published as a blog post, I found that during the mid-July heat wave across much of the Sun Belt, many counties with large Black and Hispanic populations experienced some of the highest heat index conditions, while at the same time enduring large COVID caseloads. This analysis was used to provide a few common sense recommendations that Congress should enact to protect people from both heat and COVID. They're summarized in the 2 bullet points here, but there is more detail in the blog post, which I'll make available as a follow-up to this webinar. Hurricanes, heat, and COVID combined over last week and this week To add to the seemingly never-ending threats during the heat and hurricane season, Hurricane Laura left more than 260,000 customers without power in Louisiana, as reported by Greenwire yesterday. 100 plus heat index conditions, power outages, and people sheltering at home or forced from their homes to shelters constitute, in effect, a secondary disaster in the making after the destruction caused by Laura. The federal response has been decried as inadequate. For example, FEMA approved a one-time $500 cash assistance to people in a handful of Louisiana counties, which is 1/3 of what the state requests to the federal government. Now, what does the future hold in terms of extreme heat? What are the choices that we have as a society to avoid the worst of extreme heat impacts augmented by climate change? I'll briefly mention the work UCS released last summer, well before the pandemic, of course. In our Killer Heat report and accompanying article in Environmental Research Communications, we explored the frequency of days at or above heat index thresholds that could be avoided in the mid and late century under various emissions pathway scenarios. No action here refers to RCP 8.5. Low action refers to RCP 4.5. We also modeled rapid emissions reductions based on the Paris Agreement. This analysis shows the rapid, widespread increases in extreme heat that are projected to occur across the country due to climate change, including conditions so extreme that a heat index cannot be measured. That's what the update chart means. The analysis also finds that the intensity of the coming heat depends heavily on how quickly we act now to reduce heat trapping emissions. There's much uncertainty about when the pandemic will come under control, and the impacts of climate change continue unabated. These are broad strokes of how the pandemic and climate change impacts are colliding to magnify existing inequities among vulnerable groups in the US. I hope this is the starting point for a conversation with Laura and all of you about what solutions we can devise or propose to reduce colliding impacts in our community. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. I'm trying to find my button for my camera. We will move on to the next speaker, and that is going to be Mark Hartman. Mark Hartman is actually a native of Canada and became Phoenix's Chief Sustainability Officer in 2014, thanks to his extensive experience in community, corporate, and urban sustainability. He has been working with ASU's HUE project to understand and mitigate extreme heat in Phoenix. Thank you, Mark.
Hey, good, and good to be here. And hi, everyone. I'm gonna take a hot minute to tell you about the heat things happening in Phoenix. And, as kind of the topic is today, I must say that adversity has its own gifts, and that as we look at COVID, I certainly see things that it's actually teaching and helping us be prepared for the future at the same time of its sort of a certainly extreme negative side of many things happening with COVID. And I'd kind of like to walk through some of those. Let me just see how well I can, my screen is frozen here, but okay, here we go. Phoenix, as it described, yes, I would say the city itself, not just looking at the whole state, but the city itself, it's hotter in cities than in rural areas because the cities take a much longer time to shed heat, particularly in the evenings. So in the evening hours can be a 21-degree temperature difference between the city and rural areas. And on average, it's even 3 degrees hotter in the summer, just the temperature you're experiencing, just because of its many hard and impermeable surfaces and a lot of concrete. So, I guess they're exacerbating the problem that they have. And so they're a great place to sort of look at solutions and where solutions actually can make the biggest difference as well. And so, and the concern is around heat, it's certainly, evident to all here on this call that it affects public health and well-being, not just hospital visits, but, even the people who work outdoors and experiencing homelessness and all those that are certainly very difficult. And vulnerable populations are really where it is. For many people, it's not an issue. They can actually navigate quite nicely, but it doesn't affect all the people the same. So that's really where we need to think of solutions and how to implement and be thinking that way. And of course, economic vitality. And if we were to kind of look at that, I could actually just change the first word there and say COVID threatens the same things: public health and well-being, vulnerable populations, and economic viability. And so some of the solutions and the ways we're thinking about it, it's been very interesting looking at that, about even using COVID as something that we look at and prepare for the future for all kinds of things. And I'll first kind of outlay what our heat mitigation program is and then how it's kind of changed as we look at that. So certainly from a policy perspective, I must say, contrary to, other cities saying, oh, well, you live in a desert, how crazy that is. But actually, it's part of our DNA here. I mean, we actually talk about living in a desert all the time. Like it's part of our DNA and part of the way we think about it. And as some cities are now looking at heat, we've been looking at solutions for heat for decades. And so as we're now working with ASU on a heat ready certification to define what it is to be heat ready, our policies, our programs, our governance, as well as a watershed mapping tool. So looking at vulnerable communities specifically and looking at how do we make the places cool where those that are dependent on transit and dependent on walking as they navigate their way to places they live, work, study, and play, how do we make those corridors cool as well as places they live? And so as well, we have some nice policy initiatives that we have. Phoenix's Walkable Urban Code. I don't know of any other code that has this kind of requirement for shade, but all our high growth areas fall under this zoning overlay where 75% of the space around the buildings and new construction needs to be shaded. And so pretty unique, as well as I really think there's some great opportunities we have and things we're looking at around the building code of how can we modify our building code as far as materials used and as far as the use types of how to make things cooler. And then the programs, I think part of it, I'd call it just cool research. I would say that we're the epicenter of research related to heat, that ASU certainly the premier researcher of heat, but even other universities have come here and studied it and looking at, as well as not just cool materials research specifically around cool roofs and cool coatings and cool asphalt. And what are some of those things? Even, I don't know if you've heard of some of the latest kind of things they're exploring are converting radiation to long wave radiation so it reflects back into space and doesn't actually add to cooling of our atmosphere at all. So some of those on the underside of those materials can be up to 20 degrees cooler. So actually ASU and others are experimenting, putting them on bus stops and those types of things, really interesting. And as I kind of was describing, our real view of having a network of cool corridors so you can navigate, pedestrians and cyclists can navigate through our city and through our tree, and I don't know what that other word is, but it looks like shade, master plan for how originally we thought of it that it'd be a whole city, but actually we just need to look at where the corridors are. And then of course our We're Cool campaign, or part of the Heat Leaf Network, that's part of the Valley. It's really a best practice network where 135 organizations all work together to actually help those in addressing heat. And what it looks like in a normal year, our We're Cool campaign, actually, they go and they hand out, 8,000 cooling maps and 3,000 bus cards and water and, hundreds of thousands of bottles of water and be connecting with people and making sure they feel connected and connecting them with places to go to and cooling centers. But it kind of has a little bit flipped on its head. And so kind of have this modified cooling. So this is the convention center, as a solution. And we actually take buses from people to and bring them actually every morning and deliver them back to other places in the evening where they can stay the night. And so provide them meals during the day. And, what's interesting around this is we are working with, started with Tempe and Braden K and others, kind of launched a whole conversation among all cities in the Valley of how do we do things differently with COVID? And so there's kind of a best practice standard. It's quite amazing, all the decisions you have to make and how to have a COVID safe environment for these people to come. What are the worker standards around gloves and masks and health checks for employees so you're not spreading it even through the workers? And then what are the health checks for the people visiting and what's the standard and protocol? And what do you do in case of emergency? And so long guides of how to go through and do this. And really interesting going through this and learning what it's been like and certainly adapting as we go. Over a couple hundred people per day visit this cooling center and are here during the day. So quite interesting, effective how we do that. And that's actually the mayor in red there visiting just the other day. And looking, I'd mentioned our tree and shade master plan. We've kind of looked, okay, well, here's our map of the city. So where do we want trees? Where else do we want trees? It kind of maps all where they are, the GIS location and size and species. We make our tree planning. But actually, that as well. We need to really be thinking about it at the neighborhood scale, particularly vulnerable neighborhoods. And so this is actually from a new GIS model being developed out at ASU. It actually looks at the neighborhood and the types of tree canopy based on land use and determining how do we actually look at it in these vulnerable communities specifically, so that actually we can create this place where, you know, one of the frameworks we're talking about, and I'm really excited by it, is actually having all people in vulnerable communities within 5 minutes of a 5-minute walk of a cooling asset. So whether that's a cooling center or, you know, certain drinking fountains and cool corridors where people can actually have places they can go to in these neighborhoods. And so really a different way of thinking about it. And Ariane mentioned at the beginning in this cool pavement pilot where we're trying these surfaces, and I just want to say how significant, what the significant potential of this is. At first, it just seemed like, oh, it's expensive putting a coating on, but actually these sealants we put on pavement anyway, and so this is just a different type of sealant. It is more expensive, but instead of like a 2-year coating, it could be up to 7 years. So what sort of looking at the math and doing the economics of it, we realized if it actually increases the length of concrete or asphalt, I should say, and actually improves it, we could actually, the life cycle cost of putting these coatings on could be less. And so even the director of streets made the comment in one of the online discussions with the community about it. We had some online webinars with each neighborhood where these were. It's going to be 8 different neighborhoods, and they've already done a couple already, where talked to the community members, and he said, you know, if this works, we could actually see these cool coatings in every neighborhood in Phoenix, which is a pretty remarkable change from what it was, and certainly that they create a cool surface. And, you know, looking at, Ariane mentioned students, it sounded like the way she put it, that they're hanging from the plane through ropes, but I don't know if she meant that, but maybe just they did students because the insurance is less on students than faculty. I don't know. But at any rate, looking at the cool corridors where, and where people, where the asphalt is, where are the places that we really need to cool within these flyovers. And so in summary, kind of in this, that, you know, one of the things that's really important is sort of an adaptive management approach where you realize that you can't just be like a cookie cutter, here's the program and here's what we do, but actually really needs to be thoughtful about how do we issue this and how do we prepare. You know, I would say that adversity that we're experiencing is kind of a midwife to resilience. You can actually, it's helping and forcing us to really look at our whole systems approach to how we do things and how our being can handle multi-threats at the same time, not just heat, but, you know, other such we have with viruses, and really look at all of our programs and our emergency response. What do we do with emergency response in times of COVID? Like the whole idea of gathering people in centers. And so really interesting. And I think that one of the things it's also bringing about is cool innovation. That as we think about it, it's really, you know, that's one of the most interesting opportunities is that, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. And so some of the cool innovations that are coming out of this time have been really, where they might not have normally happened, short of having this concern and issue. So, you know, pretty exciting. So that was a quick, as I mentioned, flash in the pan through our work on heat, and be happy to kind of talk later on the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Actually, the students are strapped kind of like in a seat belt to the helicopter, and then they lean over and then take the photos from the top. So,
oh, thank goodness. Yeah, thank goodness. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up and last in line, last but not least, is Masavi Parea, and he is the Coalitions and Training Director for CHISPA Arizona. It's a community organizing program, part of League of Conservation Voters, that advocates for resilience and climate justice in Phoenix. Masavi is a tireless organizer, intent on pushing back polluters, holding elected officials accountable, and building political power for environmental, economic, and social justice. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Masavi, and take it away.
Thank you, Ariane, and thank you for the invitation. This is a very good conversation, and we enjoy these conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about CHISPA Arizona, right? Well, my name is Masavi Parea, as Ariane presented me. I'm the Collisions and Training Director. I'm originally from Chihuahua, Mexico, Phoenix resident for over 25 years. I'm a father, husband, hiker, runner, and a community activist. My original trade was a construction worker. I was a roofer and a welder on this beautiful weather. And right now, I consider myself an immigrant labor environmental justice advocate for the last 15 years. So I want to talk a little bit about CHISPA, CHISPA Arizona, who we are. Our mission is to, what is our mission, right? CHISPA Arizona is a program of the League of Conservation Voters. We are growing Latinx voices, political power, and civic engagement for a cleaner future in Arizona. But CHISPA Arizona, we are a little bit different than other groups. We focus on environmental justice. We stand with frontline communities in our fight for environmental justice against the ravage of toxic chemicals and climate change. And we mostly work with the Latinx community. And going back to this topic, right, COVID and the heat. Well, first, let's talk about heat. Yes, we know it is hot. How do we know that it's hot? Well, because unfortunately, our community is getting sick. Our family members are dying. We can feel it, right? And as someone before was saying, we are not able to do many activities. But also, we know that it's hot because we are paying more for electricity. So this brings us back to this question. Is this heat normal? We know that this is not normal. Why we don't know that this heat is not normal? Because, well, not right now, right? But most of the time we walk to our schools. We utilize public transportations. Also, we see the lack of public parks in South and West Phoenix. We know that this heat is not normal also because the gentrifications in our neighborhoods. We have seen many heat islands produced by factories and corporations in our neighborhoods. And also we know that this is not normal because every year is worse. So something that sometimes we don't talk about it, or most of the time we don't talk about it, is environmental racism makes COVID situation worse. We know that, as someone was mentioning, right, in areas like South or West Phoenix, the weather is hotter, right? Well, the same situation with COVID, right? We have seen in reports that the COVID situation is worse in areas such as South Phoenix and West Phoenix. So what should we do? I mean, we are a very resilient community. We have been living in this area for many generations, right? Before that, this place known as Phoenix, right? We were the indigenous community was living here, and they were able to survive. So now we as a community, we have to engage. We have to engage in activities. We have to engage with elected officials. We have to engage with universities, right? I have the privilege to work with many amazing people from ASU on doing this research, and I have learned a lot. Also, we need to activate our community, right? We have to reach them. We have to let them know that there is things that we can do. And the third, of course, we have to transform. We have to transform this reality, and we have to stop this climate change. So CHISPA Arizona, the way how we work, we meet people where they are. We are out there in the community, having conversations, having education, and overall engaging people. We work in a very different way, right? As we say, we meet people where they are. So we use creativity a lot, right? So in order to bring these issues, because when we are talking about the necessities of the community, right? Yes, our community needs better jobs. We need to stop police brutality. We need a better healthcare system. We need an immigration reform. We need many things. So in order to talk about environmental justice, we have to be very creative, right? So one of the things that CHISPA Arizona is working right now, because in this COVID situation, that's one thing that we are seeing. Yes, unfortunately, a lot of people is getting sick. Unfortunately, a lot of people is dying, but also because we have our kids at home, because now we are not able to go to the park, or we are not able to do many to the community center, to the library, so that people stay at home. So what does that mean? it means that the electricity bills is increasing. So CHISPA Arizona is working in one campaign that is called APS Forget the Debt. So I'm gonna put a little example of this campaign that CHISPA Arizona is working on it.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching. This is CHISPA Arizona News. I'm Dulce Juarez here with...
I'm Masavi Parea from La Finiquera, Arizona.
And we have some important news. Today, the ACC, the Arizona Corporation Commission, gathers as they listen to APS customers. APS is asking for higher increase of their rates. At 6 p.m., the Arizona Corporations Commission will be hearing from APS customers. Activists from CHISPA Arizona will be asking the ACC to enforce and make sure that APS does not increase the rates, and also asking that they forget the debt. With a global pandemic at this moment, people are not able to pay or afford their electricity bill, which is off the hook.
If you are an APS customer, please call this number. This is very important. As you may know, this hat is not normal, and we are seeing increases. So if you're an APS customer, please call to this number where we can help you with that. Can you say the number?
And the number is 1-866-705.
So this is CHISPA Arizona. This is what we do, and we work a lot with the community. We have our own committee in ASU. So if anyone wants to be part of CHISPA, please, you can look for us on social media, and also of course in ASU with our CHISPA ASU committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masavi. I think we are now ready to take questions from the audience. And the way we'll do this is that Lauren, who's on this call, is going to collect the questions for me, and then I'll go through each of those questions, and then one of the panelists will respond to those questions. Some questions are for specific panelists, other questions are very general. So let me see, we already have 5 questions, and the first question is from Sandy from Sierra Club, and this is a question for Mark Hartman. So Sandy says, I appreciate trying to mitigate impacts, but why is the city of Phoenix allowing the zoo to pave more of Papago Park and add to the heat problem? There are already acres of pavement, which raises a second question. How about actually reducing instead of continuing to increase paved areas? Mark, do you have any insight on the zoo's perspective or the city's perspective on this?
Oh, certainly. And that's exactly why ASU is involved and why ASU is studying it. They're looking at how do they make it integrate to the natural environment, to affect looking at runoff, as well as looking at solutions that they were actually given. Said, look, the city will not help you because it's some of the city land. The zoo's operated separately. It's not run by the city of Phoenix. It's a separate nonprofit. But one of the things the city said is, look, if you even want permission to do this, then you're going to need to make it a model for mitigating urban heat islands. They're just adding more heat out in that community. So it was actually a prerequisite of giving permission for them to look at expanding their parking to meet demand. We actually told them, if you're going to do it, then it needs to do that. So that's why ASU is involved in studying and doing research on it, and looking at lots of solutions, not just on the material itself, but also having permeable pavement in some of the areas, as well as having solar canopies along the walkways. They don't use a lot of electricity on site, so it's hard to, you need a place to use the electricity if you have solar, but it's certainly looking at lots of solutions there. So it is considered to be a case study and a model for how to do it differently. So that's, but perfectly, we certainly did also kind of pull back and we said, what, more parking in a place like that? Like, we really need to think of better way to do things.
Great, thank you, Mark. We have a question for Masavi from Laurel Harden, and she wonders, why are CHISPA folks paying more for their electricity? Is it because of higher temperatures in their neighborhoods, or are the rates higher, or are their homes less well insulated, or all of the above?
Thank you for the question. And I don't think that that's only CHISPA members, the ones who are paying more. I think this is a community in general, as we were talking, right? Like, just let me give you my example in my household, right? I have 2 kids, right? And normally during this day, I'm at work at the office, right? And my kids are at school, right? So at the AC, it doesn't have to work, right? So nowadays, my AC is running all day, right? So that's happening not only with me, but that's happening with most of the families. So we are spending more electricity, right? And APS, we know that the company made millions last year, right? And it would be fair so they can forget the depths of many people who are trying to survive. Thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Sure, yeah, sure.
In general, you know, a lot of the community that CHISPA serves in Phoenix and Arizona, South Phoenix, are low-income folks and that typically rent their homes or live in overstock housing. Those homes are less energy efficient, which typically leads to a higher energy burden for those communities. It happens in Phoenix. People living in low-income and energy inefficient homes, I should say, pay a larger share of their total income in power bills. And also some of the neighborhoods that have very little vegetation and lots of impervious land surfaces and land covers are also hotter, thereby making the thermal environment around it hotter.
Great, thank you. Wow, we have a lot of questions still coming. Mark, you're very popular. Next question again for you from Cindy. Last year, passing through Canada, I was surprised to see trees on the tops of some of the buildings. Do you know the purpose? Is there any benefit to heat reduction? Maybe not feasible here due to the lack of rain.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Yeah, definitely seeing green roofs. There's either intensive or extensive green roofs and different solutions. And there's 2 benefits to green roofs. One is actually makes the lifetime of the roof go really long. They can sometimes have 40 years for a green roof because no UV is affecting the roofing materials. They also insulate the building better. So they work really well. And certainly when I came here, I was thinking, oh, that'd be great, but we just don't get the rain and it's too hot on the roof that really nothing could survive up there. I'm actually having trouble keeping stuff alive in my garden, let alone on my rooftop. No, I think it's an interesting solution, but just the idea of green roofs here in such a hot desert environment isn't really a great opportunity.
Great, thank you. A question for everyone, so whoever, anybody can answer. A question about trees from Paradi Baradar. Are there any studies done on what type of trees to plant in order to avoid causing environmental allergies for residents of Phoenix?
Yes, I can answer that. Certainly, there's multiple trees. So we have a tree palette available on phoenix.gov in our Parks Department, as well as the county has one, and they give the different attributes of trees. Some trees for the pollen, some trees for the amount of ozone they cause, so ozone-friendly trees that reduce the amount of ozone. Some that require more water, less water, grow fast, grow slow. So they actually give the attributes of each of the trees. So, and I think either the Phoenix site or the county site both have the full tree palette of over 40 different trees and their different attributes.
Yeah, and Dave Fondula just posted a link in the chat that has the specific list that Mark mentioned. It's from Maricopa County, and they rank the VOCs, the organic components, and I think they also have a ranking of shade provision in that table. Thank you, Dave. Okay, question number 5 from Daryl. I believe Tucson is requiring developments to utilize rainwater harvesting to grow trees and plants along streets. Curb cuts to direct water to landscaping, I believe, is now required. This appears to be a proven strategy for creating more shade. Is Phoenix considering a similar approach?
Similar, I mean, we certainly have looked at that and thought about it. It's just the amount of rainfall we get in Phoenix. Tucson is just that much cooler and has that much more rain that it's a significant difference, where it just doesn't have the economics for that, you know, few times a year that we have rain. Like, it's been almost none, I think, since March. that it just doesn't, it really would not be a benefit to actually go through that. But that said, we have looked at green infrastructure standards, and we are working with MAG, the Maricopa County Association of Governments, to include those standards for green infrastructure into the code, so that there's actually, they can prescribe it and actually do that as a solution, more than just just curb cuts, but actually the entire system on how it works. And then as well, looking at other solutions for even for looking at, is it possible to use recycled water to in our street sweepers and things like that. So no, I think definitely a good idea, but it's just not applicable here. We just don't have the economics for making it widespread curb cuts and things.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Sam Block, and he wonders, again, Mark, you're very popular. He wonders, does Phoenix have a long-term plan to lessen AC use? How does shade and urban form fit into that?
So yeah, so really, it's really interesting. If the building code in Germany was the building code where Ariane's from, it was a building code here, our buildings would use 80% less energy. And looking at the passive design of homes, that really the only reason you have air conditioning is because the current heat is infiltrating and the cooler is leaving the building itself. And so if you build a better building envelope, then you actually need very little air conditioning. So one of the things that we have in Phoenix's goal for 2050 goal was actually to have buildings to be net positive in terms of energy and materials, so that buildings that actually produce more energy they consume, so they provide a service instead of being a liability on the utility side. And so that's a real opportunity. And so passive house standards are being used, so certainly on the new building side, and even looking at insulation on existing homes and doing that particularly in low income sectors. So no, I would say passive design is definitely the way to go. That said, Phoenix is somewhat, you may not think it's mild, but actually we average about 78 degrees a year. And we may be 30 degrees over room temperature, but somewhere like Chicago could be 70 degrees under. So what energy we use to condition our buildings is less than what they use in cold climate cities. So even though people say, oh, you got to air condition your place, well, they got to heat it. And actually we use less energy than both Chicago and Portland to condition our space.
Okay. Well, we stick with codes and standards for now. Next question, also Mark. You mentioned codes that require new developments to include a certain amount of shade. This question is from Anna, and she wonders, when will these codes pass, and where can we where can we read more about those shade standards?
Oh, certainly. So it's actually passed. It's been in place for a couple of years. It's called the Walkable Urban Code. And so if you just Google search Phoenix and Walkable Urban Code, you'll probably get a link right there. You can read about it, and it's 75% shade and other attributes. And we're thinking of what we could actually add to that, in addition to just 75% shade around the buildings. But yeah, so certainly lots of info. And I must say, I think I get lots of questions because Phoenix has the most problems of the panelists. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay, well, here's a very interesting question. Somebody says, we ran into heavy opposition from the development community as the city of Phoenix was working to pass a complete streets policy. The policy and design guidelines got watered down due to their influence. And that's not just a question for Mark. How do groups like CHISPA deal with special interest influence, such as the development lobby?
Mm-hmm. It's, I think they really need to be strategic when going about doing things. I think in how it all unfolded, particularly looking at the complete streets, as far as how to make policy happen, I don't know if it actually ended up going about it. It ended up going the right way, and whether they were given the right direction, but they really didn't go about the right way of how to continually engage and have council included and supportive and align. There needs to be, and so I think that's really important to really connect when wanting to bring policies forward, to really look at, okay, how do we do this that actually has support for going ahead. I know at the time, many council members were saying, we don't know enough about this, we're not comfortable doing this, and we're hearing some negative things, so no, we're going to say no. But they should have been known well in advance about what was happening and being included in those conversations. So I think, not that one in particular, specifically, I think that happens a lot of times, that if things are, if you don't actually have making sure that people are brought along, then the change that you want to see, you can see it just ixnayed in the last hour because there wasn't proper making sure that you built a coalition of support for it.
And Masavi, do you have any experience dealing with these lobbies?
Yes, one of the ways how CHISPA Arizona works is through advocacy, and there is always a lot of need. However, most of the time we need to educate the elected officials because sometimes they are not aware like what it works or what it doesn't work. You know, so for us, it's very helpful to be working with ASU or any other identities. Like, well, we work a lot with Sierra Club, for example, right? And they help us a lot to educate the elected officials. So I think there are many things that need to be done, but I think the first process is like the education on those matters.
Okay. Here's another question for you, Masavi, actually. From Marta Verbis, she asks, we're talking a lot about green solutions. In your experience, what are some of the barriers for implementing green solutions in the Latinas or other communities of color? Any solutions or any barriers that they face?
No, thank you for the question. That's a very good question. And again, let's go back to necessities and priorities, right? If there is and as Juan was mentioning, right, in areas like South Phoenix or West Phoenix, where people live in apartments or mobile homes, right, they are not going to have the same facilities that are people that lives in North Phoenix, right? So I think the first barrier is to understand the community. The first barrier is not to engaging with the community. We have worked with a couple projects in South Phoenix, actually, like Spaces for Opportunity, where the community has been engaging. So I think that the first barrier is like not to go into communities and say, we are gonna fix the situation. It's like, how can we work together and how can we learn from the community to make these changes?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there are two questions here about reflective roofs, actually. So one person asked, in 2008, Hashem Akbari, who's from the Berkeley National Lab, explained that it takes about 10 square meter of white roof to offset 1 ton of CO2. Globally, roofs account for about 25% of the surface of most cities, and pavement accounts for 35%. The benefits have been known for over a decade, and many ASU scientists know this to be true. Why haven't we moved along faster to reduce the urban heat island in Greater Phoenix? How can we make this happen? And then a related question from Mick Dalrymple said, he asked, how about building code requirements for higher solar reflectivity on roofs?
Yes, I did kind of mention that, coral roofs, within my presentation. That was on my agenda for the building code. I certainly I've actually knew a lot about coral roofs from when I was in Vancouver. Actually, you should know about them here though. And they have done a lot of studies and they are effective. I am 100% in support. I think it's great. On the commercial sector, like if you actually fly over Phoenix, on the few people that take flights now, you can actually see in the commercial sector that over 90% of the commercial buildings with flat roofs have are white roofs. Like it is really done. Commercial sector, they understand the economics, that it's actually a pretty significant energy savings. For homeowners, you know, certainly invasive of our, you know, the freedom of people here. So that's one that has to be handled carefully. And so probably through means of incentive to do that market transformation. So it's a little bit longer road to actually say to a builder, you need to have a certain amount of material that, you know, the builder industry can be in opposition to that. And so you really need to figure out, okay, how do we arm them and show the economics? Because some of the materials cost the same. So it's really getting consumers asking for it, giving incentives to builders to try it. And no, I certainly see there's some work to do there. That's a whole project area, at least, but we certainly know, and I'm 100% convinced, the research is pretty clear that cool roofs would make a difference and actually lower energy use in buildings and actually cool our urban environment. So no, definitely a good solution. I agree fully with whoever suggested it. And no, that is on my work program agenda to kind of do a cool roof within the building code on our upcoming building code change.
Thank you, Mark. So we are getting close to 3 o'clock, and we still have 6 questions here on my list. So we'll go through these 6, but we will not be accepting more questions, but feel free to email us, and then we will respond to your questions after the webinar. Okay, so let me see if we can get through those 6 questions. There is a question here about gardening. Has the city of Phoenix or other cities, have they considered guerrilla gardening and other efforts to increase community gardens?
Yeah, or actually, I think one of the more exciting areas you have a lot of bandwidth in is in the urban gardens, community gardens. So we're working with the whole Maricopa County Food Systems Coalition, or MARCO, and that has 75 organizations all partnering together. Phoenix has got goals to eliminate food deserts, to look at many solutions to introduce food gardening, and actually really building up that network and coalition of support for gardens. And we really see it not just on bringing fresh and healthy food to communities, increasing social cohesion and actually reducing diet-related disease by introducing, because a food desert is when someone is more than a mile from fresh and healthy food, that vulnerable communities would be a difficult time getting access to that. So, I think there's some really good efforts, and I think if you Google Marco, you'll find a lot, and be involved in that actually if you're interested in this food sector, because they've got lots of great ideas, and there's a lot of energy in that organization to really transform food systems within the valley.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. There's a question now, I think it's a general question. How are the institutions centering the voices and lived experiences of community members when determining solutions to mitigating extreme heat? So how important is the input and experience from community members?
I'd like to take a first stab at that, and then Masavi should definitely say something. I think it depends, and I posted something also on the chat in response to that question, that at the federal level, there is a need to address carbon emissions, right? And reduce those. But because we are locked into a certain amount of warming because of the persistence of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, that there's a need in the short term then to develop adaptation, so that the most vulnerable populations are protected. They won't do that, and the folks that he has been working with at the Nature Conservancy have provided some really good examples through the heat action plan developed together with them and other scientists at the Asian community members. Of how those voices can be centered in specific needs of those populations in terms of, I remember reading there, it's too hot to walk from the neighborhood to the school. So that maybe, and that came directly from community members. So centering those voices is very, very important and can lead to solutions that are equitable to help communities increase their adaptation. Sorry?
Yes, thank you, Juan. Yeah, I would say that is very important that people get involved, the community in general gets involved. I think, we know, right, that our leaders or elected official leaders, they are elected, right? So when they see that this is a hot issue, right? I think elected officials and government in general, they put attention. So it is very important to call, to text, to email, and to participate, because that way government is going to be aware that this is something that people care. Because I think one of the issues here is that we don't put a sense of emergency, a sense of urgency about this heat, right? We saw 50 days or more, 110 degrees. So this is not normal. We need to do something now. So absolutely, I think the public in general, the participation is necessary.
I think it's known, I think a topic of conversation, that cities have not been good listeners to the community, that in many ways they just do things. So I think it's being very much, although we have people with PhDs here from ASU today, really these members have a PhD in their community. They understand what life is like there. They understand what happens, what the impacts are. And so hearing from those communities are really the only way you find out workable solutions, that otherwise, you're just really missing out on that. And I think listening to, that's really where cities need to take action first over doing just general where people might be politically connected. They need to first focus on vulnerable communities. So, and it's great having Masavi and others here today just to kind of bring that to light.
Thank you, Mark. There is a question for everyone here. That could be a quick question. It's really great to hear about the sustainability projects underway in Phoenix. Are other cities in the metro area also engaged in these efforts? And I think the answer is yes. We don't have anybody from other cities here on the panel, but I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we work a lot with Tempe on sustainability issues. I know that there was a project that is just getting started with the city of Scottsdale. I think the city of Gilbert. So I think a lot of cities in the metro area are aware of these issues and are working on those issues. Yeah, it's a bit one-sided because we have Mark on the panel, but there are efforts going on in other cities as well. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say the Sustainable Cities Network is actually we meet regularly and talk about sustainability in all of our cities, and there's over a dozen cities part of that. So.
Yeah, it's an effort led by Ann Richmond at ASU, and we can forward the information to that network to you if you're interested in learning more about how which cities are involved and what sustainability issues they're working on. Okay, so we have yes.
I'll say that the Nature Conservancy heat action plans include, I think, a neighborhood in Mesa as well, in addition to 2 neighborhoods in Phoenix.
Okay, yeah, I think we should close this discussion pretty soon. I have 3 more questions left. If we can answer these 3 questions in 2 minutes, I think that would be fine, but then we have to close down. One question very quickly, in what ways do you ensure that shade is distributed equitably around the city? Are there any efforts of like deciding where the shade goes first?
So yeah, I did describe somewhat in my talk that the cool corridors, we only want it where it's needed most and where the people are. That originally our thinking, I think when it first came out, the Tree and Shade Master Plan was to cover the whole city in trees, but actually no, we just need it to where the vulnerable communities, and that's certainly what we're focusing on, is that it's vulnerable communities only, it's really where that shade is needed. And so that's where we're putting all of our efforts, and certainly first and only efforts is in those communities.
Related question.
And I'm sorry, and that also takes us to the last question. Is like you need to call your city council member. You need to call the Parks and Recs, and so they can also like be aware of what is happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. 2 more questions, 30 seconds. One is, do you see a shift in tree species as temperatures change in terms of what trees survive and which trees don't? Any trends? Anybody on tree species?
Yeah, no, I'm not a landscape expert, but I know I'm recognizing a lot of my tree species are not surviving this summer. That's been super hot. So.
Yeah, same here.
Okay,
yes.
And also it's just going back to our roots, right? Go to native trees, right? Like Palo Verde and Ocoti and Mesquite, right? They're from the area, so they're gonna last.
Thank you, Masavi. Very last question, and then we'll call it a day. Perhaps Phoenix is an exceptional case, but how would you describe the most significant obstacles to cooling infrastructure and cooling relief policy for vulnerable populations in Phoenix and the Southwest in general? Is it a technological learning curve, or are the obstacles primarily city planning and politically based? That's the very last question of the day.
I would say that the largest impediments in Arizona writ large are a very little political will to take the climate change issue with the seriousness, the urgency that it requires, to take into account the needs of the most climate vulnerable populations. I think I posted some links related to that question in the chat. We used with other colleagues a framework of pro-pool climate adaptation pathways as a way to get towards climate justice. And we find a lot of impediments in the current political culture of the state, in a tax-averse sort of environment that doesn't really favor large-scale interventions, the sorts of large-scale interventions that are needed to mitigate and adapt. I realize there's way more to say about that than what I said. But we'll run out of time.
Yeah.
And if I'd say one comment about that, I mean, certainly when you bring things forward, it needs to be in a political context. So if I'm bringing forward things to mitigate heat, I would not say this is a #1 thing to address climate change and have that go to the legislature, like, you know, as a climate change action. I would be unanimous. It's pretty nonpartisan to actually deal with heat and shade and cool and public health. That is well supported. That's not a political hot button. And so in that sense, you just need to make sure you're focusing on the right thing. And in this case, it's actually, you know, our own resilience and really bringing it forward with kind of focusing on, you know, people are very concerned about air quality and heat here in Phoenix, and that has, you know, unanimous support from council and from all levels of government.
That was a great ending. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your great presentations and for answering all the questions. Thank you so much to the audience for being with us this afternoon. And thank you so much for all the great questions you had. I wish we had more time to continue the discussion. Hopefully in the next event, hopefully we'll see you all again on this channel. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, wonderful weekend. And thanks again for the great discussions.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the wonderful panelists.
See you, everyone.
Bye.